Hi, everyone. My name's Danielle. I'm really excited to be here. I just want to thank the conference organizers. I think I met some of them over there, but can we just give a round of applause for a really great conference? So let's get started. I'm here to talk about Node.js releases. First, a little bit about me, though. I come from the United States, if you can't tell from my accent. I work at a little cloud provider called AWS. I work on a platform called Amplify, so it's a platform for mobile and front-end web developers. You could do a lot of stuff like spin up servers, databases, and host your front-end apps there. But that's not the interesting part. Today, I'm here to talk about Node and the work that I do on Node. So another thing that I do is I'm a Node.js releaser. I'm also on the technical steering committee, and then I also help with security triaging. So that's why I'm here to talk about releases. So does anybody know at this moment how many supported Node releases are available? You just shout it out. Great, okay, perfect. So we're gonna talk about that. I heard 8, I heard 4, I heard 3. There's actually 3 right now. Does anyone know how many releases have been done this year alone in 2020, what year are we in, 2022? 3? No, not 3. 1, no, okay, great. So I'm also gonna talk about why there's many more than 3 and 1. We've done about 30 on the team. I think I counted 32. So yeah, a lot of work, but the reason we do all that work is because we like to make it seamless for the developers like you. So before I get started, I'm just gonna kind of go over the base definitions. What is a release? A release refers to the code changes that have been made in the Node.js code base, and that those are put onto the release line and then deployed and released in the Node binaries. Code changes are evaluated by commit, and then we use GitHub labels to categorize each of those commits by Semver major, minor, patch, and then there's other labels as well. A release line refers to the Semver major release that is being released and maintained at that time. So we have, right now we have 19 that's being worked on, 18 is going to go to LTS soon. We've had up to 5 active release lines at a time. Don't ask me how we got there, but right now we're at 3, and so we try to keep it 3 to 4. And then I think it was probably COVID related, but and then releasers, we're not actually responsible for writing the code that goes into the releases, but we are responsible for making sure that we understand everything that goes in. We're writing the release notes, we're making sure nothing breaks, testing, etc., and then of course deploying the releases. So there's 3 stages of a release. We have current, so when a Semver major is released, I'm going to say release a lot, so if I trip over my words, please forgive me. So a current release is the first 6 months of that release. It's released. We try to keep it in sync to the Node base branch, which is main. Everything that lands in that branch roughly is what is in main, so you're getting the latest and greatest features, and then, but everything, so everything kind of goes in for main, but except for the Semver major changes, which would go into the next release. So after 6 months, it goes to active LTS. That's kind of, you're still getting the latest and greatest features, but the changes have already been tested in the current release, so they've already been tested in the wild, so that anyone that wants maybe a more stable version of Node, they're not just getting, hot off the shelf features. It's already been baked for a couple weeks, and then we pull it into the active line. And then we have maintenance mode. And so maintenance, we stop bringing in commits from the base branch, and we actually just start making patches to that release line. So there's security patches that go in, bug fixes. You'd be surprised how many bug fixes and security patches go in. It's for 18 months, so we are maintaining that version, but we want to make sure that it's still usable because a lot of people are still using it. So this is just a visual of the timeline. So I'm going to use BR and AR as the rough date. So around 3 months. Oh, and they age by months. So you can think of it as maybe a pet or a child. It kind of just ages over time, and it goes through these life cycle stages. So around 3 months before the release, I think this is flexible considering, depending on, who's working on it, but we start to talk about what's going into the major release, at least on the release team, put out the schedule. At 0, that prepared release goes out. So in a couple weeks, for example, Node 19 is going out. So it's like this big, event. Everyone's talking about the breaking changes. And so that's very exciting for everyone in the Node community. The next, what happens next? Yeah, so then after that, we move to active LTS. That's 6 months. And so like I mentioned before, we kind of, whoops, not doing that right now. Oh no, leave me alone. Okay. So yeah, so we move to LTS. That's when the release line stabilizes and we make sure that we are pulling in more stable commits. Odd Semper major releases are deprecated at this point, so they reach end of life, and we kind of throw those away and we don't use them anymore. After 18 months, it's moved to maintenance mode, like I said, and then as all good things do come to an end, after 36 months, roughly, sometimes, this might change, but the release reaches end of life. So that doesn't mean you can't use it ever. I've gotten this question before. It just means that we're not gonna maintain it anymore. So it's highly, highly recommended that you do move off of end of life versions because that you're open to any security vulnerabilities and the Node.js team will not feel bad for you. Okay, so this is like a crazy graph. So basically this is kind of showing the number of commits that go into each release over time. So you can see I started kind of April of 2020, everybody's favorite month, and then it kind of ends around now, I think. So you could see like when, so let's see, we've got version 14. Version 14, you can see when it was in current, it's roughly around 100 commits per release. We have, they go out every 2 weeks, so it's fairly, it's a regular cadence, and so everything that's in main goes in. Then you can see once it hits LTS, those releases start to spread out, but it doesn't mean that we have less changes. It just means we have bigger releases, and so we like to give them more time to test, more time to kind of evaluate what goes in. So you could see we surpassed 200. There's one over there that's over 400. There's one up there that's 600. And then we kind of have at the same time, we have another release that comes out. It's doing current. It's every 2 weeks, roughly 100 commits are released. And then we kind of have the less frequent LTS releases. So you could see we had a huge one up there, 700 commits in one release. And then also, yeah, and then we start over again. And then once it hits maintenance mode, then you have commits there, 5 commits, 8 commits. It kind of stabilizes until the release hits end of life. So how do we maintain all of this? Because we do not keep it all in our head. So it's all very Git driven. So we have 2 Git branches per release line. One is you could call production branch, and then the other one is the staging branch. So the staging branch is the one that we work off of. We might move in commits, backport commits. I'll go into what that means. And then the production branch just mirrors what is released at that time. So yeah, so we also, I mentioned it a little bit before, so the way that we maintain kind of all of these commits across, pulling them in from main, is that we use GitHub labels pretty religiously. So there's a lot of trust that's required between a lot of the Node.js contributors and collaborators to make sure that we are labeling changes correctly so that something, that might be a breaking change doesn't go into a patch release or something. That's an extreme example. But so we have, like I said before, Semper major, Semper minor, Semper patch labels. And then we have a wide range of labels that kind of say, okay, like don't land this on 14, don't land this on 16, et cetera. So this is just, yeah, another visual. It kind of shows how once each Semper major release hits its kind of release date, it branches off of main and it's maintained in parallel with main. And so it never comes back, it's diverged and it never comes back and merges with main. We've done that later with V18. And so the way that works is that with the commits, so you could see, so this is an example with where we're diffing between main and a current release. So we have commits, the little squares, if you could see those are my commits. And so we have moved those into the staging branch. And then at some point we move them into the production branch. And then those get updated and everything becomes in sync, but it's still behind main because it's never going to sync to main because main is where the code is, and then these are this is where the releases are. So how does that work? We have some cool, just realized the command might be a little wrong, but that's fine. We have some cool Node Core tools that we use. This one takes a branch diff between two Git objects, so you can use commit SHAs, you can use tags, or you can use branch names. Takes the diff, it lists out all of the SHAs, and then there's a deny list flag that you can use. So this one I just said Semver major. Obviously, we don't want the Semver major commits from main, but there's also some other labels that we might add to. And then we just cherry pick. It's pretty straightforward. So we cherry pick, each one goes on. What happens when you cherry pick? You probably have some merge conflicts. So I'll talk about how we deal with that. Let's see. So yeah, so there might be hundreds of commits that we go through. So we don't actually do them by hand, one by one. We can't automate everything because of those merge conflicts, because there does need to be a human kind of looking at that and saying, okay, can I resolve this? Should I ask for a backport PR? And then that human also needs to be there to keep track of that and drop those commits. We can't automate that yet, but hopefully that will. I don't know if anyone from GitHub is here, please let them know that's what we're looking for. So what is a backport PR? So when we are working on the releases and something doesn't land correctly, we'll ask for a backport PR, and that's just a pull request or a commit that has made it onto main that when it landed on a staging branch, it doesn't pass the test, it breaks the build, it causes too many merge conflicts. So depending on maybe how many merge conflicts we've run into in that release, if it's the first one, maybe I would sit there and say, okay, yeah, this looks fine. But if it's the 10th one in the release, I'm probably just going to say, I don't want to deal with this. Whoever is the author, please open a backport PR. It just helps us so much. So this is the command that we use to kind of automate. So you just get the same list of commits, and it pipes it to cherry pick, and so it goes through and adds all of the commits to the staging branch. And then we run a local test. So what make test does on the Node.js code base, it will build a local binary for you to use, just a node binary, and then you can run all of your tests on it. So we're done, right? We're ready to release. No, test always fails, so there's a ton of work that comes after this now. So, so the way that we now need to figure out where this breaking changes or where the several breaking changes is we have to divide and conquer. So we use git bisect, which for anyone that doesn't know is a divide and conquer, uses a divide and conquer algorithm, which is dependent on a sequential set of objects. So for instance, git SHAs, they go in order because git is a sequential log of changes. And so we take the first commit, which we know is the failing one. We take the last one, which this one points to the, this one could be one that we know that is passing, or it could be the last commit on the last release from the staging branch. And then we start a git bisect. And so it partitions the list of SHAs. We see what, depending on that middle commit, did that commit pass or did that commit fail? And then it takes the right or left side and says, okay, and then we recursively go through and look for the offending commit. So we do this, we go through the git bisect, and then we find the offending commit. And so Are we done now? All right, so we have to do an interactive rebase. We'll drop the commits, commit, and then we run and make tests to see if it works. And does it work? No. Usually we have to do this several times because there's lots of bugs that might come up once we take out a commit. So for instance, if I have, like in main, if I have a commit that is changing a lot of files and then suddenly I have a lot of other commits that are kind of built on top of that, I drop one commit, I try to resolve it, but now all of those future commits are all dependent on this functionality. So we have to go back, bisect again, rebase, and do that over and over again until we have a passing build and passing tests. So we're ready to go. So next, the next steps are preparing the release. So we write the release notes. We have another Node Core tool that we use that generates the release notes really nicely. So we just have to, again, hand it a Git object, and then it'll generate kind of the diff of the commit so that we can add them to the release notes. And then again, like a human has to go in there, update the release notes so that there's some notable changes so that the developers that are reading the release notes can see, okay, this is what I need to look out for. This is, these are the new features. This is how they work. This is the new APIs. So if you're interested in what's going out, there's pull requests that get opened too. So in order to circulate the pull request, we propose it on GitHub. Every person that opens a pull request, we try to do the pull request rules or whatever. Give it 48 hours, have at least two reviewers. Yeah, and I try to, people that have made like major changes in that release, I try to, we try to get them in and say, hey, do you have any like thoughts on this? Can you come up with, is there anything, that we need to add to the release notes? This pull request doesn't have very good release notes, but usually that's what we try to do. And then we run the CI tests. So I already mentioned we run tests locally that create the build, but that's just one machine. I have a Mac. Not everyone has a Mac. I don't think anyone's using Macs in the cloud. So, we have to run tests on a bunch of different supported architectures and operating systems to make sure that everything's passing and there's no, crazy regressions across any sort of platform. The next thing we do also is we test with the ecosystem. So if you've ever seen the acronym CITGM, can't even spell it, CITGM, anywhere in the Node code base, that's referring to the tests that are run across the Node.js ecosystem. So we have a bunch of popular packages. We run their test suites against the new package, or the newly built binary. We look for any regressions, anything that might pop up that might, that could be disruptive to the ecosystem, because the last thing we want to do is release something that breaks a bunch of packages. We don't really have Node if we don't have packages and Node modules, I think. Okay, so while we're working on this, I just want to address the security patches. So we're doing all of this in public, so how do we address any security reports? Node is a pretty big project. We do get a substantial amount of security researcher inquiries, and so we try to address those and then in a timely fashion also patch those. And so that all happens pretty much in the same way, but just in private. So there's a lot of coordination that goes into that because the wording has to be very specific. We want to make sure that when we do release those security patches that the developers that receive that, they really understand the severity, if it'll address, if it will affect them, and then also how they would fix that in their code base. So yeah, we do everything in private, the testing, the reviewing, and then we release and we make the vulnerability public, and hopefully everybody upgrades. So the last step is building out that release. We create the builds. This is the easy part because we just throw everything at CI. We create builds. We tag the release on GitHub, and then we promote and sign the releases. So every releaser has a GPG key that has been made public. We sign those binaries, we upload them with a SHASM file. You pull those, you download those binaries with the SHASM, and you can verify with everybody's GPG key, and you can see, oh, this person, they made this release, that's the person that signed this binary, great, it's verified, I'm safe. So now that, excuse me, so now that I've released, what comes next? Well, I know for me, I never stop thinking about what's coming up next. So I finished a release and I have a couple more scheduled. We schedule releases months in advance and years in advance. And that's because we do have kind of a robust schedule. And so we want to make sure that we have enough people to cover all of those releases that go out. And so it's really important that we're thinking not just at what we're doing in that moment, but like, you know, months in advance and scheduling out. Especially that's super critical for the security releases because we need to make sure that those go out by a specific time. There's no releases currently scheduled through 2026 to give you an idea. So we're always kind of thinking ahead. Another thing that's just I think is interesting is that we also have all of the code names. Those are all kind of scheduled ahead. So right now I think we're up to through 2026. Assuming that we do keep with the same code names through Q and W, we still don't have names for those. So if you have any ideas, please open, I wrote pull request, but please open an issue if you have any clever ideas, because that's definitely something that we've discussed. And then so this is a lot of work to do. How does our velocity look like? So I mentioned how many releases we got out this year. This is just the number of releases that the release team has done since April of 2020 when I kind of pulled all of this data. I think this is roughly over 100 releases. I think I counted 112. So as you can see, we have the two kind of odd numbers. Those, they've reached end of life. I don't remember how many exactly they were, but you could see it's between 10 and 20. And then we kind of have a nice, slope for, okay, we have our maintenance, we have our LTS active, and then we have current. And so those will slowly grow as we progress in time. And so I would say that given all of the kind of work that we have to do, I'd say the velocity is pretty good considering there's over 100 releases have been able to be put out in the past 2.5 years. And so does all this craziness really benefit developers? I think it does. Some developers might not want the latest and greatest features. They can only have the capacity to upgrade every year, maybe every 2 years. So we don't want to have everybody just sticking to, okay, everyone has to take what is in the base branch of Node. And so we also have that current release for people to get the latest and greatest features, but that's why we keep maintenance around for so long because not everyone can upgrade. There's a lot of cloud providers as well. They are trying, they want to make sure that their platforms are also, supporting these versions in the way that they want to. So, they're a little slower to adapt. And I think that this model really helps accommodate a wide range of developers because, Node is a very large ecosystem, and so we want to make sure that we accommodate everybody. Am I doing on time? All right, I have 1.5 minutes left. So if you have any questions about release, these links, I'll put this on. Put this online. This is a very long link, so I don't expect anyone to remember that. But this is just the release guides. If you're interested, there's a whole run book for how we do releases, and then also the release working group link. So if you're interested, please reach out to me or any other releasers. They're all scattered about here. And yeah, I just want to say thank you all for listening to me. I hope you have a great rest of your conference. Thanks.